All right, welcome everyone. Appreciate you taking the time on a Tuesday night. I am very excited to introduce Matt Mikesell. He is a world-renowned sports psychologist, treats anyone from middle school all the way up to Olympic level athlete. We are thrilled to have him here today to introduce the concept of how sports psychology can not only help improve performance, but also well-being. Matt, we are so excited to have you here. The floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Ben, so much. And my goodness, this is a great time to be connecting, especially as we have opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games just a few days away, Paralympics shortly thereafter. So I'm really excited to share a little bit of best practices, both, we'll talk about sports psych and how that can help us in life and in performance. But what I really wanted to do is take advantage of our time today and say, those athletes who are preparing at the best of the best, the highest level, what are they doing? How do they prepare for those moments? And that's not just for those athletes. It's not just for athletes who are, at an elite level. I remember when I was back in getting my master's, there was a sports psychologist who was kind of what I looked up to in the field. He said, at the Olympic Games, everything is a performance issue. So if you're navigating relationship difficulties, if you're navigating stress around school, if it is just around managing performance anxiety, or just managing expectations, and whether it's on the field, off the field, it all matters. And so that's what we're training them for. So that's why I want to present a little bit of to you guys today. So again, special thanks to the Jackson Clinic for helping to really connect us together tonight. It's really with Ben and the Jackson Clinic here that is a reason we're talking. So special thank you and shout out to them. Just a little bit about Premier, so we can have a little bit of a context for some of what we're going to say. We have a brick and mortar, two of them actually, one up in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and then down in the Fort Myers area. But at Premier Sports Psych, we're looking at individual sessions. We work with collegiate, Olympic, professional contracts, as well as through our private practice here, athletes young and old. And then we also do a lot on the business consulting side through our sister company, Premier Performance Advising. We're fortunate enough to be in at least all of those leagues. I haven't looked to see if it's updated since this last year, but we've been able to do some pretty cool things, and Premier opened some pretty cool doors. So it's that kind of cumulative experience that I'm able to share with you a little bit tonight. A lot of times sports psych is something that we hear of, but we don't always know what happens behind the curtain, so to speak. And so I just want to share a little bit that sometimes it looks like, as we were saying before, our conversations are around that performance restoration or that life outside of or off the court, the mental health concerns. Sometimes it looks like performance optimization, right? Being at our peak, trying to get that mental edge. And sometimes in sports, we just talk about the balance and the overlap of the two. And I imagine that's where a lot of us here are today, that things that are going on, either things that we can improve on or things that maybe we're great, we want to be even better at. It impacts our life. It impacts our performance. It is kind of holistic. It's hard to compartmentalize, and that's why I went and got the training that I have, so I can be able to speak across this full spectrum and continuum. But with that, let me pause for a second. For those of you out there, I want to ask a question. And you don't necessarily have to respond out loud, but I'm curious about this. If you think back to your best performance, maybe it was a sport performance, maybe it was something in fine arts, maybe it was something around maybe a test performance. I want you to think about, what was your X factor for that performance? For some, it was, hey, I felt really rested. For some, it might be, I was really focused, or I felt really confident. For sometimes it's, I got some extra study reps in, and that helped. I want you to take a moment and think about what your X factor was. So think of one of your best performances and one of your X factors for that.
And if you'd like to enter it in the chat is open, so feel free to type in the chat if you'd like.
Now, I have this Post-it here. Sometimes I'll do this exercise, and I'll have people write it on a Post-it, whether it was I love that example. Being calm and focused was maybe one that we just saw in the chat there. I'll have people write, was there X factor? There's a lot of elements of sport, right? Physical, tactical, technical, and mental. I'll ask, was your X factor more on the mental side, or was it more on like the physical side? And 99% of times, I actually had the opportunity to do this with an NFL team as a rookie class coming in, and 22 out of the 23 people in that rookie class, this is pre-cut, so it was a bigger rookie class. 22 out of the 23 indicated that it was mental, and at that level for sure. The physical, everyone has it. It's really about the mental. That's what we train, whether it's helping you be at your best in life, whether it's helping you to be at your best in sport. Like, that's what we train, because the reality is that we all carry stuff with us, good, challenging, exciting, or otherwise. We always carry stuff with us, and sometimes that stuff is easier than others to kind of put down and being able to be really present for. And sometimes it's really challenging to do that. So one of our goals, and one of my goals whenever I'm working with someone, is to make it easier to carry that stuff, right? Coming out of COVID, we often use this analogy of like mental health being a backpack, and I think that's true even beyond mental health too. Is that like sometimes we need to find tools and strategies to kind of lighten the load a little bit. So that's a little bit of the context of Premier, a little bit of the context of maybe some of what we would do in sports. Like, jumping in for us for today, there's a few different things that I really want us to connect at. Like I said, there's really three main topics, themes, strategies that I want us to leave here with today. And from this, we're going to talk about this in both kind of performance and in life. And then I want us to get a combination of tools. Sometimes we experience things cognitively. Think of like, I don't know, stress, right, or anxiety. Sometimes we experience that from like a racing thought standpoint. And sometimes some people experience some of their emotions more from a physiological standpoint. So I want us to touch on both of those between these different interventions today. And again, this is something that whether we are really framing this in the context of academic performance, athletic performance, career performance, there's something for you here. So one of the first kind of questions or exercises that I want us to go through is a little bit of a follow along with me here. So our thoughts can be in really three different places at any given time. They can be in the past, they can be in the present, and no surprise at the third, right? They can be in the future. No trick questions. And this is something that I'll often, we'll get on the whiteboard and we'll draw this out with athletes. We hear, and even if I back up a second, right? We hear a lot about like why breath work matters. And, if you just, you don't have to show of hands or throw it in the poll, but a lot of times we hear about breath work, or we know about we should just take a deep breath, but there's actually something to that. Then that'll play into leveraging our own neurochemistry for us and not against us. So in terms of that, we're not just taking, being told to breathe just for the sake of it, and not all breaths are created equal. But why do we talk about breathing as a strategy? Well, our thoughts can be at any one of three places at any given time. They can be in the past, they can be in the present, and they can be in the future. And I'll kind of draw that out by these circles will be the heads of a stick figure, right, to represent our mind or our brain. So if our thoughts can be past, present, or future, my kind of question that I'll ask out loud and answer for yourself, or if you want to take a guess and put it in the chat, is what percentage of time do we think our thoughts are either in the past and in the future? I'm not asking about present. What percentage of time do we think our thoughts are in the past or in the future? As you think about that, sometimes the thoughts from the past that I would see maybe on like the mental health side might be, regret or replaying conversations, On the future, that's where I think of like a lot of anxiety, right? The what ifs and the worries, and then the if this and that. That's not necessarily saying that we shouldn't be thinking of the past or the future. I'll kind of give a visual for that. But what percentage of time do we think? Let's see. I'm seeing 97% to 75, 89. Okay, so we have some pretty high guesses here. Um, what I like about all of that is we are playing the math in our favor. We're at least taking a third and a third and guessing it's at least a little bit more. So well done on the math there. Um, what we see is about 80% of the time out of default. 80% of the time, our thoughts go to the past or the future. And this is actually, if we look to, like survival of the species, right? Back in the day, it made a lot of sense to be wired this way. So there's nothing wrong. There is nothing pathological about this. It might not be helpful, but it's not pathological either. It made sense for us to remember threats and to anticipate future threats if we kind of use it that way. And in fact, we have a whole system in our brain. Our amygdala is responsible, kind of that fear monitoring system, to the point where sometimes it actually creates threats that aren't even there. But 80% of time, past or future. My next question is, where does your best performance happen? Past, present, or future? This could be, we could call this elite level performance, right? We got Super Bowl coming up, we got Olympics coming up. Totally, right? A couple of people are already chiming in. Performance, there's only one place performance can happen, and it's in the present moment. Because of that, there is something else that's always in the present moment, and that's our body or our environment, right? Think of our senses, think of our environment. So rather than trying to just fight fire with fire and outthink anxiety, if anyone's ever tried to do that, we can know what a hamster wheel that might feel like. Rather than try to like outthink anxiety or again fight fire with fire in that sense, let's use our physical body. Let's use our environment around us as the cues or the anchors to bring us back to the present moment. Again, if this is a school performance from like a fine art standpoint, an academic standpoint, an athletic performance, if your job just requires you to be in the present moment, like this applies to you. So now when we talk about taking deep breaths, now when we talk about breath work, and there's a lot of science behind it, hopefully we have an understanding of why, and we're going to talk about a specific type of breath in a moment here, but hopefully we have an understanding of why we talk about that from a performance standpoint. Now the question is, okay, well, how do we do that? I said earlier, not all breathing is created equal, and that's spot on. We all breathe. We all don't all breathe in the most effective or intentional way. So the how lies in this picture here. Hopefully there's a little bit of a smile on our face despite the tears. If anyone can think back, maybe kids of your own or nieces, nephews, or neighbors, I want you to think back to the last time you heard someone cry. And I don't mean like, really touching moment. We have these like tears. Well, no, that wasn't a tear, like, no, like truly like stop. And if you think about what that sounds like, it's usually something along the lines of like, and at some point, that like hitch in our breath is the exact thing that we want to leverage. So we call this our crying breath. Hopefully the picture and the name make it stick a little bit. This is also something referred to as the physiological sigh. And it's also can be referred to as like the diver's breath. It's something that divers, like deep sea divers, right, recognize as a way to most efficiently fill the lungs. So when we're talking about acute stress, in the moment, I need to bring myself back, this is the most effective way to do so, in that it only takes 2 or 3 breaths. Now, we can, if anything, I think other, and I'll share what that is in a second here, but other types of breath work that we might hear a lot about is like box breathing, which is great, right? Kind of the, whatever our ratio is, we often think of it as like a 4-second inhale, a 4-second hold, a 4-second exhale, and a 4-second hold to make that square, that box shape. That's great. This is going to be a little bit more effective in that it's more effective even sooner. The other thing that we hear a lot, and I teach a lot, is like diaphragmatic breathing, right? So pushing out against our belly button when we breathe in, as if like there's a balloon inflating in your belly, and then that balloon deflates when we exhale. Also really effective. That one's particularly, I think, for like a longer meditation, but that can build into the crying breath. What we really want to leverage here, and where this gets different from box breathing, is in a crying breath. Again, think of that that kind of hitch in our breath. There's a double inhale. So we inhale without letting our breath out. We inhale a second time. And then what we want is a, not blowing out birthday candles, but a forceful exhale through the mouth that, if you just think of the time it should take longer than the combined time of our inhale. So that would look like, I should hear that exhale. Pause for a moment. I want everyone to do 2 of those breaths. Feel free to take yourself off the camera or mute yourself. I fully recognize people watching you just breathe can be an odd thing. It happens every day at the office, so it's a little bit normal for me. But inhale, long, slow exhale, audible through the mouth. 2 of those. What research points at is, and where this works is through our gut, through our in our kind of our brain. We have in our kind of our heart, we have the phrenic nerve and the vagus nerve, and they are responsible for communicating things like our fight or flight. So think of, man, I can think of this story still comes to mind. I don't do snakes. If anyone on this call is with me on here, like either join me or mute, because this might be like a challenging story, and I mean that in an entertaining way. I remember the first time being down in Texas. I grew up in Wisconsin, and we don't have any poisonous snakes there. But down in Texas, totally different story. That's like all we have is poisonous snakes. And I remember the first time seeing that like shredded snake skin, like multiple feet long. And I don't even think it's one of those stories where like the snake gets bigger as time goes on. I think it was just a giant snake. But I remember seeing that, and I was on high alert. I was out for a walk with the dog and saw that, and you can imagine just like kind of just like, what is this? I've never had to deal with this. My brain is doing the thing my brain does. It scans for threats. I am my sympathetic system, my fight or flight is really, really, really high. And so over the next few days, I'm still scanning. About a week later, I'm starting to kind of downregulate a little bit, being a little less hypervigilant. Until about a week after first seeing that, again, taking the dog for a walk, and I kind of turned this corner, so I couldn't see what the path was ahead of me until I turned the corner, and there in the middle of the path, just like the middle of the sun, was this like serpentine shaped thing, and again, huge. And I just froze, and I like that's what I learned. What my fight or flight was that day was freeze, just. And my dog's giving me this weird look, and I, probably felt like forever amount of time that went by, and it took me what felt like forever to realize that it was like it was a long shredded bike tire for whatever reason in the middle of the sidewalk there. And that moment of, oh, that, oh, I can breathe. That was my parasympathetic system kicking in. So fight or flight, sympathetic, parasympathetic, think a parachute coming back down. I share that story to say 2 of those crying breaths is enough to activate our parasympathetic system. And that's why I say this type of breathing is the fastest way to downregulate. When you're trying to perform, very rarely do we truly want our fight or flight to be behind the wheel, in command, in charge. Our crying breath is one of the fastest ways to bring ourselves back. So with that, what I want you to do, we did a couple reps of the breath itself. I want you to take a moment and write down for yourself. You don't necessarily have to share, but feel free to. But I want you to write down, okay, what are those stressful moments for me, and where can I pair in that type of breath work? A lot of times when I'm talking with someone in the office or whatever it might be, things like sound really good, right? But to go from like that makes sense, kind of the light bulb moment, to lasting change, but we need to create a plan for action. So that's why I want us to pause, and we're going to do that after each of these 3 strategies that we talk about here, and create that plan for action. What are those high stress moments? And where can I plug in that deep breath, that crying breath? Maybe if you know it's an organic chemistry exam, and maybe we just make it a habit of every time I sit down at my desk or every time I open up that textbook, it's a double inhale, long audible exhale. Let's create that as a new habit. Okay, so from there, let's shift gears a little bit. Does anyone know who this is? Feel free to throw this in the chat, or if someone wants to come off mute. All right, so we got one person that says free solo. Okay. Alex Honnold, that is right. What do we know, if anyone is brave enough to come off mute? What do we know about Alex Honnold?
Unfortunately, they can't come off mute, just
Oh,
based
no.
on the way
Okay.
it's set up. Yeah, they can just throw it in the chat. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, throw it in the chat. All right. Taipei 101. Yep. Dude fears nothing. I'm just responding or reading some of these out loud here. Yeah. What I think of, if you're queasy, again, look away. These sorts of moments. Death fears him. I like that. So for those of you, it sounds like we got a little bit of a good gait or good kind of rhythm going here, a little bit of a sense of what this guy's all about. If you look closely, this is not an edited photo in terms of taking out his climbing equipment. Alex Honnold is what we said, death fears him, no gear, no fear, right? He is a free solo climber, which means he does things like climb up this mountain without anything but a bag of chalk and a lot of training and preparation. This is one of the scariest things I could ever imagine. And so from an athletic standpoint, like, wow, talk about an incredible case study. What I want to go to next is talking about how you can actually leverage a little bit of what he does in these moments. Because if he can do this for, couldn't tell you exactly which of his many free solo climbs this was, or just what we saw, was it last week, Friday, on Netflix, live, Climbing Taipei? What is this guy doing? How does this guy approach these situations? Because we could imagine, I mean, if I look over in the corner over here, I'm guessing, and I can see the rope, I can see like the hooks, probably what, a cameraman or something. If I'm this cameraman, I'm freaking out. And I'm not even the guy that doesn't have the rope. So what is about this? Where we want to go next is something called the cognitive appraisal process. This is one of the paramount tools to reappraising things like pressure at the Olympics, right? So let's talk about this for a second. So my clicks got a little bit off here, but we're not supposed to see cortisol yet. So there's two different ways we can appraise a situation. Our body goes through this automatically. The first couple of them is like, does this event matter to me? A little bit different for Alex Honnold. If you guys are playing, if this is an intramural sport and it doesn't maybe really matter to you so much, you're probably not going to be super stressed out about it. But if it does matter, okay, do I have the resources to cope? If I do, get super stressed out about it. But if I'm not sure, right? And again, if we think of those future thoughts, there's a lot of uncertainty. All of a sudden, our brain starts to get into, by default, this threat appraisal. But we have an opportunity to reframe or reappraise that. So kind of our branch here is we can either have this threat appraisal, or we can choose to see the same situation as a challenge or as an opportunity. What's really cool about this, and what I gave away already here, is that this isn't like a positive self-talk and, just think wishful things and it'll happen. To be honest, I think that's, well, that's not supported in science, first of all, to just say positive things and then things will be okay. I think there's a lot of fluff that can potentially happen in that. And why I say some of that is, if our brain like kind of calls BS or has like a red flag, like if I'm, saying something like positive self-talk and I don't actually believe it, it's not going to be effective. So let's make sure that our self-talk is like rooted in something true. And I think this is a really good way to do that. So by default, our brain is going to go to that threat appraisal. Beyond just like that's unpleasant to experience, the neurochemical cascade of that is, when we see a situation as a threat to us, we have cortisol that gets unleashed and pumps through our system. Does anyone know what cortisol is more commonly known as? Throw that in the chat. What is cortisol? Stress hormone. Exactly. Yep. Y'all are nailing it. Conversely, if we choose, and this is where, I don't have this on a slide here, but I was just prepping for something with one of our Paralympic teams later this week, and I was reflecting on this phrase that I'm going to paraphrase it by Viktor Frankl, and it says something along the lines of, between every stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space, there's a power to choose. When a situation happens, if we can choose to see that it's a challenge or opportunity, this isn't just a, again, fluff night, feel positive, this is nice. We actually change just by seeing the situation differently. We change our neurochemical process. So instead of cortisol or stress pumping through our system, we have norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is more commonly known as adrenaline. Exactly. So I don't know about you, but if I'm Alex Honnold, this threat response is for sure the default. It is only with training that I can leverage this challenge or opportunity response. It's not going to come out of default. If I'm climbing this building in Taipei, the last thing I want is any more stress than is already going to be on me, right? But if I can leverage that adrenaline, some pretty cool things can happen. But again, I say only with training. One of the ways where I think sports psych gets maybe a bad rep or gets misinterpreted is like quick fix motivational speech type of thing, but it's not. Just like any other physical skill, when we're talking about our mind and our mindset training, we are talking about time on task. And the same thing if I'm, if we're meeting with someone, think of like your traditional therapy experience where it might be, and hopefully it's more than just this, but okay, let's talk about the last couple of weeks, work through some things, and then we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. In that next meeting, you talk about the last couple of weeks. If all you do is spend that 1 hour every other week training your mind, you could certainly get better, right? But if just like any other skill, any other kind of physical, yeah, kind of physical skill or sport specific skill, if you can train that day after day, week after week, you're going to improve a lot more, a lot faster. This is one of those examples where we have all the research, and I have slides with the references at the end. We have all the research to show that with training, we can leverage our own adrenaline. So, my question for you is, what are the current challenges that you're facing? This could be, again, life, sport, unrelated to sport. What is a current challenge that you're facing? And how can we reframe that? How can we see that same situation as a challenge rather than a threat? And I'll give an example beyond Alex Honnold. Um, been working with a team that it's a small group of a team, and they're getting ready to do this uh, kind of dream come true sort of sport performance here at the Paralympics coming up. And common theme that I hear is, I don't want to let my team down because I know what it means to everyone. I don't want to be the guy or the girl to let them down, right? And so all of a sudden, that's an easy threat. But if we can reframe that as, my team has my back no matter what, which they do, and they know that, but that's what they have to lean into. All of a sudden, this becomes a lot easier to take that pressure shot. So what is a current challenge in your life? And how can you reframe that? And then that last part, again, this can all sound great right now. How are you going to remember that when that event comes up? Maybe it's a reminder in your phone that you're connecting to the date of the exam or the date of a big event. Um, how are you going to remember that? Maybe it's a sticky note on the mirror, all these things. Um, what are we going to do? Take a moment just on your own, create that action plan a little bit. Okay. Now I want to move us on to our last of three, right? So we talked about using our breath to bring ourselves back to the moment. We talked about being able to, use those cognitive reappraisals. So we have kind of a physical thing with our breath work. We have more of a cognitive thing with those reappraisals. This all sounds great, but sometimes in the heat of the moment, it's just like we forget. And that's why we're building in some of these reminders. But let's not just rely on our memory. The amount of times and you could probably relate to various extents, that I've been in conversation with someone, and there was like a to-do item, and I was very well intended to do that thing. Um, but then an hour later, I totally forgot, and I don't remember until I see that person again. It's not for lack of effort. It's not for lack of interest, right? Like, we just often have so many things going on in our mind. I remember working with an athlete who he shared this story. He, pretty, he was a great guy to work with, high level athlete, and he talked about his experience playing college basketball. And this was, it wasn't his last year, so thankfully this wasn't his last experience. It was the last game of the season for him, and uh, so the context of this was the team that he played for was a little bit of an underdog come the tournament. It was their conference tournament, and of course, you win, you go to the dance and all that sort of stuff. And we're kind of debriefing this after. He tells me the story where the game is actually closer than it maybe should have been on paper, to their advantage, in a way that, again, it shouldn't have been that close. They were within striking distance at the end, such that they had to play the follow your worst free throw shooter game. Hopefully he misses, come back down and score, and wash, rinse, repeat until we can celebrate a victory. He wasn't like a star on the team, high effort player, pretty intelligent player too, but Paul talks about like he went in for as one of the guys with fouls to give because he wasn't playing a ton, and his job was like less than a minute left in the game was very, very, very clear. But I forget the number. We'll say 41. When number 41 gets the ball, you foul him. We are gonna like face guard the heck out of everyone else. He's gonna be the one to get the inbound here, and I needed to follow him right away. Very clear instructions, pretty straightforward. It's not a complicated situation. It happens all the time in basketball games. So what happens? The other four teammates right there, face guarding everyone, making it really hard to get the inbound. They let 41 get open, and this guy that I'm working with, my client, plays the best hands in the face shuffle defense you could ever imagine. High effort. He was locked in, except the thing he did not do was foul number 41. And everyone is shouting, foul him, foul him, foul him, foul him. And eventually, after precious, precious time ticks by, it's, oh yeah. And he fouls him. And man, the weight of that moment stuck with him for a while. Too much time went by. They didn't really have a chance after that to come back and win the game. Now, it wasn't that the instructions weren't clear. It wasn't that he was an unintelligent player. It wasn't that he knew better than the coach and I'm just going to go wrong. Like, it was in the heat of the moment. Sometimes our brain just isn't there, right? Like sometimes the things that like are best, best laid plans of mice and men idea. So with that, I have this stoplight here. I want you to picture yourself in a vehicle at a really busy intersection near wherever you're at. Not a freeway, but an actual intersection. Maybe there's a stoplight there. Maybe there is a roundabout or stop sign or whatever it might be. Now, what would happen if you took out that stoplight, that stop sign, that roundabout, whatever? If you took out all traffic control, what would happen at that intersection that you're thinking of? What would happen? Probably a lot of chaos. Not because, yeah, mayhem. Not because anyone is, has ill will or isn't trying to be a good driver. Like, that's just chaos and clutter and mayhem happens. So that's why we have these traffic signals, right? So what I want us to think about is the same thing. When it comes to these high performance, high pressure moments, let's not just rely on our memory, or let's not just rely on hoping mayhem doesn't happen. Let's like do some proactive work to have a signal, so to speak. And I use this traffic signal because if we're sitting in the car, there is something external to us, right? The stoplight in this case, to help us know when to go forward, slow down, proceed with caution, things like that. So let's build in these signals to help us remember either some of the things that we've talked about today, or maybe it's a different cue, right? I'll share this this idea here. I call this our win signal, and win stands for what's important now. When a lot of times, I'll use a baseball pitcher as an example. There are so many things to be thinking about on the mound, from the last pitch, the next pitch, the score, who's on base, your own technique, to the crowd, the environment, right? Having a win signal is a way to keep our world small a little bit and what's important now. So some examples of this win signal might be, I had a pitcher one time, right? He had this like mantra that he wrote, just the acronym for in the dirt behind the rubber on the mound. One individual drew a cross, and for him that was a way to recognize a certain perspective that was meaningful for him. I had a soccer player who on their wrist, their their coach had a certain kind of like, if all else fails, do this, and he wrote that on some tape on his wrist as a way to keep the game simple in these high pressure moments. Where if all else fails, I want to make sure to follow the opposing player. There's nothing magical about a certain word, but we do want this, again, if we think from a performance standpoint, we do want this to be something that we can see. One strategy, one example for this is like if an individual has test anxiety, sometimes the words like breathe or slow can be a way to slow some of that down. It's just a reminder to do some of the breaths that we talked about before. So from a win signal standpoint, I kind of think of that game Wordle, if any of you played it. There's like the word of the day, and you have a certain amount of guesses to guess the letters, create the actual word. And you have to guess the letter and the location. I think of this for the win signal as well. What is the signal that we need? And what is the location that we want to pair that with to get the result that we want? Which is ultimately to cue behavior that we want to have happen that's going to bring us success. So what is the word or signal and the location? Classic example of this, you see a lot of like writing something on a cleat or a shoe, but I don't know how often people are looking at cleats and shoes during a game. Maybe some games more than others, but that might not be a good location for you. So again, map that onto career, life, sport, whatever it might be. What's that win signal for you? Okay. So in all of this, we have a breathing strategy. We have a way to reframe, and we have a way to build in reminders so you're not just relying on memory. I wanted to leave a little bit of time here, and there's your action slide there for the win. I wanted to leave a little bit of time here to talk about any questions that we might have based on anything here that you saw, or just while you have a sports psychologist available to you. I usually go way late on these presentations, but I wanted to pause and make sure that we had plenty of time for whatever questions that you might have. Feel free to throw them in the chat and I will answer them as best as I can. I also have, by the way, I have Premier's info on here, our website, our phone number. My personal email is the second one there. A heads up, it is Premier Sport, no S at the end, psychology. That one often goes wrong. And then, of course, some of our social stuff. We also recently got a TikTok, so I got to update my images there. And then if you're here listening to this, if you're interested in diving in more of what this looks like for personal application, we're happy to provide 20% off that intake. But with that, what questions do we have? What
So Matt, I'll
curiosities do we
start.
have?
While people put
Yeah.
things in the chat, I'll start just by asking you to sort of give an idea of what a sports psychology session might look like or feel like. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that. It was one of my favorite
Yeah.
classes in undergrad. I started out as a college baseball player for sports performance improvement and loved
Love it.
it. But a lot of people really haven't had exposure to that or experience with it. So would love you to just kind of talk through what is the like anatomy of a session with someone like you.
Love it. I'm going to go, this is somewhat of a broad framework that can help, but I'm going to go beyond this. I really think that, again, I'm going to name my bias. There's great providers that do this other ways, and that's okay. For me, it's about making sure we leave with action steps. So the sessions are action oriented. I'll try to balance, gaining a deeper understanding of what's going on and why, but all the awareness in the world doesn't necessarily help us perform our best. We have to have action tools. And that's why I tried to have action tools in this presentation today. So in a typical session, we would, whatever it is you're coming in with, of course, we're gonna connect on that. But in terms of the strategies and the tools, we are doing exercises. We are filling a whiteboard. We have some pretty cool like HRV biotech devices. We have a pretty cool cognitive training program through NeuroTracker that we use, but it is really action oriented with the goal of clear path of what that work looks like in between sessions. Because I think that's a lot of my work is in a session. Yes, we're going to talk, but what is your homework between? How do I know that I'm training my mindset? Um, some are, more like worksheets or this or that. And that's fine. That's not necessarily mine, but we're happy to move at whatever pace if we need to process a little bit more, if we need to spend a little bit more time on the action, that's great. But it's usually pretty goal oriented, and we get some work done, which is a pretty cool thing.
That's fantastic. And we did have a question come through in the chat here. Does caffeine make it harder for athletes to maintain good breathing and focus on the win, or does it depend on the person?
That's a great question. I chuckle because this last NFL season, I was traveling with one of our teams, and it was, I don't know, must have been like 7 o'clock at night. I'm sitting down at our dinner with the dietitian and order a coffee, and he just says, "Oh, so you're one of those people?" Like, yes, whatever that means. And we have a good relationship, so we chuckled about it. And I said, "Well, Ben, like, what's the research on caffeine?" And he said, a lot of times, there are people who are high responders and low responders. Sometimes, people who caffeine impacts them like really in like a really strong way, and people that didn't drink caffeine before bed. And I proudly claim to be in that second camp. So there is some individual variation for sure. Caffeine certainly can increase your heart rate, right? There's a lot of really good research around caffeine and the effects on athletic performance. So it can be a beneficial thing. It doesn't necessarily, and from a focus standpoint, caffeine can drive focus. That being said, if we are going through caffeine like withdrawals, yeah, that's probably going to be harder to focus. So I wouldn't say that caffeine in this case, to kind of get at the heart of the question, is a performance or a mental performance, or comes at a mental performance deficit. I would say it can actually drive mental performance from a clarity. We know that caffeine can help to minimize like the like physical exhaustion, cognitive exhaustion. So I don't think that has to be something that we have to choose between either doing some of this stuff or consuming caffeine. If that
Awesome.
helps.
And another question came through: how much should a physical therapist? There are a number of physical therapists on this call. How much should a physical therapist learn and address psychological factors with patients before referring the patient to a sports psychologist? That fine line of, okay, how much of this is it's nice to have it in the tool bag versus now it's time to refer to an expert and a colleague.
Yeah. I would for Gabriel, I would love to connect more on that and share some specific resources. We've done a lot with different clinics around the country on like, what are red flags? What should I be looking for? How do I have those, like, okay, I know red flags, and from a risk standpoint in that kind of mental health emergency action plan, but how do I have these conversations prior to them, because I'm seeing this athlete a lot. I think it's really important as a physical therapist to learn signs and symptoms of things like, at the very least, anxiety and depression. The research is really clear that and I'm thinking like long-term recovery, right? Not like a rolled ankle out for a couple of weeks, but like out for a longer period of time. The research is really clear that there are two different paths of return to sport. There's the physical and there's the mental, and those paths don't always operate at the same time. That's not saying you have to be the solve for the mental, but at least knowing what to look for. I guess the two kind of main things I would say with that is that relationships really matter. You probably don't have the power to change when they're struggling from a mental standpoint, but you have the power to connect. So if we respond with connection in mind, that's huge, right? Research looks at the number one variable for what's helpful as we go through stressful situations. It's not degree of, well, was this person master's level or doctorate level, or it's not are they texting or calling? What it is this idea of perceived social support, that for the person struggling, I know I can talk to this person about something. Even if I don't, I know that I can. So as a physical therapist, you can really tap into that again by responding with connection in mind. The other side of that, I would say, is as you build that connection, you get a sense of like what's normal and not for your athlete. And when you see deviation from that, that's a good time to just have a conversation. And it can just be a, hey, I notice your things seem a little bit different, and being curious, right? You're not um, throwing a label on something. You're being curious, you're opening the door, you're having a conversation. And that's can be really, really powerful. And if that conversation gets to a, hey, well, there's someone to talk to about this. Like, would you want me to make a referral or talk to your parents about this? It never hurts to ask, even if they say no. So I think that's a really important skill set to be able to have as a physical therapist. I really value a team approach. I mentioned some of the work we've been able to do at different levels, and oftentimes we see ourselves as part of the medical care team. Sometimes we're on the performance and player development side, but it's oftentimes as part of the medical care team. And I can really value and appreciate those referrals from our physical therapists, and then kind of the teamwork and collaboration there. So thanks for that
Great,
question.
great answer. And that's something that obviously Colin had been looking out for the GMU club and intramural athletes, is to create that exact team. So
Love that.
fantastic answer. Thank you. Dina asks, how have you seen injuries affect athletes' mental performance and fears when getting back from that injury?
I mean, that's real, right? Again, referencing that same research I mentioned a moment ago, there is a physical return to play and there is a mental return to play, such that there's a whole the ACL return to sport index, right? There's a whole assessment based around the challenges of this. That can be everywhere, everything from like I don't like I think of like the fear of loading a knee or the injury again, right? A fear of I don't quite trust that it's back, to I'm worried about this happening again, to I um I had my confidence before because I was at a certain level. I know even if I'm physically back, I'm not going to be at that same level. So how do I play without that same level of confidence? That's all very real, and very normal. And what I would really recommend is not waiting until you are at that point of return to play to start talking about that. With one of our MLB teams, we have a whole return to play protocol that starts as soon as an athlete hits, we'll call it the injured reserve, and it's assessment, it's conversations monthly until they're back, and then as they get closer, some of the specific exercises that you can do that research really supports is tapping into things like imagery, both imagery for maybe getting that knee extended a little bit more, let down into that squat a little bit more, and also that visualization or imagery, same idea, of you being back at full speed and kind of working through some of the mental reps of that before you do that physically. It's definitely a challenge.
Fantastic. And we have a great question, really, that I believe leans more towards the personal side and things that everyone probably deals with to some degree. How do you work towards consistently being the most authentic version of yourself on and off the field?
It's a really good question. My zoomed out thought and approach to that is that question is predicated upon that we have a good idea of who is our authentic self. So I think of things like our values, our motivators, and our drivers, as well as our fears for that, right? And being able to tap into those things. And more than just like, what's your why? I think it goes beyond that. It doesn't have to always be that. But being able to have a good understanding of like, who am I and why do these certain things come up? And then being able to identify what is the noise that pulls me from that. That doesn't always have to be a performance pressure, but there's things that are going to pull at us. And I think there's a lot of like honest self-reflection at that. So I think it's knowing who we are and checking with our things like our values. And then I think also knowing what pulls from that, and then having a plan for that ahead of time. And also knowing that like we're not going to be perfect, and having a bit of self-compassion and being able to like own it when we aren't. But really good question there.
Very good answer. Michael
Yeah.
is going to close our show with a final question.
Yeah.
He says, earlier you said that positive self-talk isn't scientifically backed for reducing stress before competition. Are there specific scientifically backed strategies that might work better to recontextualize a high stress moment?
A really, really good question. And so I want to kind of clarify that a little bit. I think positive self-talk just for the sake of positive self-talk isn't effective. So if I am, I mean, you name your sport, right? Like if I'm walking on, we got Anthony Edwards here up in Minnesota. I might have the best, maybe not him, he's probably a terrible example. Dude has some crazy competitive mindset, right? Jordan-esque a little bit. But for sake of example, I might have the best self-talk in the world relative to him. And if I say like, I can smoke this dude one-on-one, doesn't matter, half court, full court, I got this. If in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, but that's Anthony Edwards. It doesn't matter if this is positive or not, right? It's about if I call BS on myself, that's the part that's not going to work. Self-talk can be really effective. So I would frame that more of like what's helpful, hurtful, useful self-talk versus necessarily just being positive or negative. There's a lot of negative, colorful self-talk that can actually be really helpful, which is a whole separate conversation. But I would say in terms of scientifically backed strategies to recontextualize a high stress moment, what I want to leverage for this answer is let's have a really good understanding of physiology of nerves. And I think that's the way we can. And there's really, really good research here on using self-talk in this sense in a positive way. So if you think of how you experience nerves, or you think of your think of the Eminem song "Lose Yourself," right? The beginning of that, you only have one shot. This is your moment. Don't blow it. Essentially, that like high pressure moment for you. If in that moment, 90% of people will say things like, "Stay calm. You're fine. Don't worry. Calm down." That is one of the worst things that we can tell ourselves. The reason for this is we can't necessarily control nerves from showing up. So if I'm telling myself to calm down, but I'm not calm, and now all of a sudden, does that mean I'm not ready? We reintroduce this whole narrative of trying to suppress my emotions, which isn't an effective strategy. If we understand, okay, what actually is going on internally in those high pressure moments? Well, my body is preparing me. What might I feel? Maybe my hands get shaky, my hands get sweaty. I got the butterflies in my stomach a little bit. My muscles are tense. I talk to a lot of distance runners that say their legs will feel heavy before the start line as if it's the end of the race and not the start of the race. If we can reappraise and understand that what's going on in those moments, I was a goalie back in the day, and for me, I would get cold, shaky hands. And so you can imagine probably not many worse things than cold, shaky hands as a goalie. What I didn't know is, okay, what's going on in my body from a physiological standpoint that's creating these nerves? My body is priming me to perform well. What's happening is I have motor neurons rushing to my extremities to prep me for fast twitch. Thank goodness I have cold, shaky hands now. Whenever we're in, again, fight or flight a little bit, we to some extent we're in it, but we are prioritizing blood to our arms and our legs for movement. Thank goodness I'm feeling these butterflies, because that means I'm not prioritizing digestion anymore. We have these leftover like digested juices in our stomach that we experience as butterflies. So I can either tell myself to calm down or to be worried about these sensations, or I can recognize, thank goodness, the exact thing that I'm feeling is my body preparing me for this moment. So we're no longer fighting, we're no longer suppressing, we're inviting and almost like using the sensation as a positive thing. I think that shows up in a lot of different ways.
Incredible job. Thank you again for your expertise, for taking the time in the evening to support all these athletes and these practitioners. We are so lucky to have you. If you don't mind pulling up your info one more time on that final screen, just so the team who's on the call and those who are watching the recording have a chance to reach out specifically for their individual situation. Having a resource, having a team available to help with performance and just wellness is an amazing thing. So thank you again for your time. And for all who have attended, really appreciate it. Stay tuned. We're going to have another one in this series in a month, and the focus will be on nutrition. Once again, rounding out the care team and performance team for George Mason University athletes and everyone else who is able to tune in. So thanks again. Enjoy your evening. Appreciate you. Thank you.